So the immovable mind, as you may very well know, is a concept that comes from Zen Buddhism, most likely from China, but propagated in Japan. And it is a beautiful concept. It's a non-dual concept, and it also heavily influences a lot of Japanese cultures, including martial arts and including Aikido. So the immovable mind, basically, it's made up of two characters. The first one is Fudoshin. Fu meaning non, or it's a negation, a meaning of negation. Do means to move, and Shin is the mind. It could also mean the heart. So it's the mind or the heart that is immovable, and it is a profound state of impersonality. In fact, it's the nature or the seat of our consciousness, that at the very, very root, I shouldn't say the root, the very, very essence of our consciousness, of our conscious being, is immovable. That's the whole idea. And everything else that leads out from that root or from that essence, everything that kind of makes up who we are as human beings, as selves, as men or women, and Americans or German or English or whatever we may be, Swiss. Hi, Eileen. Nice to see you. It's good to see you again. All that stuff can move. It's all shakeable. Immovable mind is also sometimes translated as the unshakable mind. And unshakable basically because when things around us are falling apart and when things inside of us are falling apart and shake, or even doesn't even have to fall apart. It can be a desire. There's something out there that I really want, and I'm not satisfied because I don't have it here, and it's out there. Those things as well are shakeable. It's like, I'm Miles is good, everything's fine, and then suddenly a cookie passes by. It's like, I want that cookie. Suddenly I'm shaking, I'm moving. But underneath of that, prior to that, before all of that, there is a part of me that does not shake. That the cookie comes, it passes, and it goes away. And the part of me that observes that, the part of me that witnesses that, is not shaking. Charles Wolfson. Hey, Charles. Nice to see you. Great to have you here with us. So since it is the seat of consciousness, and since it is profoundly unmovable or unshakable, it is also profoundly impersonal. So whatever can arise in our experience just arises as experience, like all experience that comes, stays for a while, and goes. And me, the personal Miles, is relaxed and receded to the background in a state of meditation or in a non-dual state. Doesn't have to be like sitting meditating, but I can shift into that state when it's developed, when it's accessed. When I shift into that state, it's profoundly impersonal. That the sense of self is profoundly relaxed. Now, the sense of self being relaxed is a state that we can all attain, but it is a meditative state. It is our deepest nature, but then when we come out of that meditative state, it's quite natural for us to shift back into a sense of self. So I'm doing this Facebook Live, and it's there's a lot of things going on. Sometimes my computer acts up. There's an Aikido class on the other side of this wall happening, and there's some kids out there because it's summer vacation. Some of the students bring their kids. They're making noise, and Miles is like, "Oh, all this stuff. That's me. That's very personal." Or I got to think, I've got to take my kids to the pool this afternoon, and all this personal stuff is fine, and that's who we are. That's how we deal with life. But to have the ability to shift out of that, to shift into something that is impersonal, is profoundly beneficial. It's beneficial in meditation. Well, it's kind of one of the results of meditation. It's beneficial it's extremely beneficial in Aikido if we're working with conflict resolution, which I'll speak about in a minute. But it's super, super healthy because all of our stress and all of our anxieties and all of our worries and all of our frustrations and all of our fears and all of our desires, all of those things which, God bless us all, because we all have those, more or less, all of those things are attached, are embedded in the sense of self. And without the ability to access a state that's beyond, that transcends that sense of self, those things tend to stay fixated and undigested in our lives, in our kind of emotional, mental, physical, spiritual life. These things get stuck. We might have a good day where I don't feel those things. I might have a hard day or a hard period where I do feel those things, but they come and go, and I'm just kind of, I'm lucky if they're not here now. But when we develop through a deeper state of meditation the ability to access, for example, a state of Fudoshin, a state that's beyond those things, that transcends the sense of self, we get a profound sense of relief. And it's not just a profound sense of relief, it's a profound sense of returning home, returning to who we are in our nature. And as I said, one of the qualities of Fudoshin, the immovable mind, is that it is profoundly impersonal. Impersonal in the sense that there is no self in that transcendent state. That once we transcend the sense of self, there is no self. There is no sense of miles. There's no sense of others. There's no, and when there's no self, there is also no problem. So it's kind of a famous, well-known saying in meditation: no self, no problem. And one of the, and if you think of, for example, with Aikido, when we work with a model of conflict, it really is this self against this self that's kind of struggling, and it's kind of zero-sum, who's going to win. But when we can transcend in that state of Fudoshin, the unshakable mind, and taste this quality of no sense of self, then that problem, the conflict doesn't go away, it's still there, but it's no longer seen or experienced as a problem, but rather just a challenge to work with. And on the other side of the no self, no problem equation is that when the sense of self relaxes, the sense of other also relaxes. No self, no problem. No other, no fear. There's a famous quote from the Upanishads from several thousand years ago that says, where you find the other, there too you shall find fear. So if you think for just a moment, like, fear is kind of a normal human response. It's a normal human state. It's a normal human quality, and it's perfectly natural to have fear. How many times did you experience fear this morning, or today, or wherever you may be? For example, I'm doing this Facebook Live now, and there's a class over there, and somebody just knocked on the door, and I'm like, I'm kind of, I'm a bit of afraid that they're going to interrupt, or I'm going to have to get up and go answer the door, and so that's one level of fear. There's another level of fear, is that, in a conflict, oh my God, somebody's going to say something to me or try to hurt me or whatever. There's that level of fear. Somebody's going to hurt my children. That's also a level of fear. All of these types of fear are there based on the other. So in a state of Fudoshin, when there's no self as a quality of that state, there is also no other. Sure, people are out there, people are knocking on the door, my kids are still my kids, but that sense of kind of a fixated sense of other also drops away, and fear profoundly reduces in that state of Fudoshin. So things can fall apart, and you're not afraid of them falling apart when they're falling apart. Things might fall apart, and you're not worried or obsessing about them falling apart. And worry and obsessions are obviously, too much. Obsessive worry is not a healthy thing for anyone. I mean, I do obsessively worry about my children's health and things like that. So we all have a certain amount that we have to apply in life, but we want to find a way to balance that, and meditation is a beautiful way to balance it. So no self, no problem, no other, no fear. about impersonality. So in Fudoshin, it's also there's this sense of impersonality, and you begin to take on an impersonal relationship to things. Fundamentally, you take on an impersonal relationship to your own thoughts. So whatever thoughts are arising, desires, fears, hungers, regrets, creative thoughts, or whatever, they're all arising. It's just impersonal. It's a thought that's arising. You see it, you understand it, and it passes away. You don't feed it and you don't indulge it, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it just comes, it stays for a while, and goes away. Neutral thoughts are pretty easy to be impersonal with, but challenging thoughts, difficult thoughts, thoughts of anger or resentment-based thoughts, or desire or creative-based thoughts, sometimes we really kind of get involved with those things. But in a state of Fudoshin, that kind of clinging to those thoughts, either fueling them or resisting them, starts to relax, and we have this kind of impersonal relationship. We're not dissociated from them. Oh, I don't, those aren't my thoughts. Not at all. It's not dissociation. It's differentiated awareness where a thought can come, do its thing, and go away. There's a certain, if a thought comes into my mind, there's a certain karmic fuel to that thought. That fuel needs to burn itself out. The only way it can burn itself out, if I can differentiate from the thought and observe it as a thought, be with completely with this thought, and then the fuel will eventually, the karmic fuel will dissipate and the thought will disappear. That's what I mean by an impersonal relationship to thought. We also take on an impersonal relationship to our emotions. Sometimes we can be overwhelmed with intense sadness, heaven forbid, but it happens. Intense regrets, intense joy, intense feelings of grief, depression, things like this can really overwhelm us, catch us by surprise even sometimes. If we've developed the ability to drop into a deeper state of meditation, when these things come up, because again, it doesn't matter if it's a positive emotion, like joy, oh my God, I'm so happy, that type of super good emotion, or what we would, a quote unquote negative emotion, where I get depressed and kind of, whatever, I turn in a kind of a maybe unhealthy way. God bless us all. It happens to all of us. We create the ability to detach and observe, differentiate from that emotion so we can see it. We can be with the emotion in an impersonal way. Emotions need to be processed, and they will be processed if we can find the right relationship to the emotion. And that relationship is in Fudoshin is impersonal. And also we want to have an impersonal relationship, not just to our mind, not just to our emotions, but to our bodies as well. Not to be too attached, not to be too identified in the body. It's inevitable because the sense of self exists here inside my mind, and it also exists here inside my body. And it's inevitable that my identity is here. So as I start to put on a little bit of extra weight, or as I start to get more gray hair, or as I start to lose some of my hair, for example, all of my ego identities start to kind of feel like, oh my God, it's not that. But actually, Fudoshin does not shake. It doesn't move that way. It detaches. It's not that it detaches. It can differentiate into this place where it's able to be with what is impersonally, with no identification. So why is it impersonal to have, why is it important that we find this place of impersonality where we are not identified? So what I mean by being identified, is that the ego, nothing wrong with the ego, but when I say the word ego, I basically mean the sense of self. It's the same thing. We all have egos. We should have egos. We all have a sense of self. It's good to have a sense of self. But we are more than those things. And if we're limited to a sense of self, that's where usually the suffering and the anxiety and things like that begin to arise. So the sense of self, here's what the sense of self does habitually. That means you, and that means me. This is what we do habitually. We either, when something pleasant arises, we will indulge it, in an identified way. When something unpleasant arises, we might resist it. Oh, I don't want that. Or if something neutral, it could be pleasant or unpleasant, it doesn't really matter. But if it's registered as neutral, then we're kind of in denial or ignorance of it. So the sense of self does three things. It indulges experience, it resists experience, or it denies experience. Whenever there's indulgence happening, when I'm eating potato chips, and I know, okay, I shouldn't eat too many potatoes, that's just indulgence. It's an indulgence. It's not a bad indulgence. I'm not saying indulgences are bad. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do indulging. That you shouldn't indulge. It's totally fine to take pleasure in life. But if we want to find a place that's beyond the sense of self, where we're not habitually looking for something to take pleasure in, we need to delay our gratification. We need to practice delaying our gratification to help try to find this place of unshakable mind. Guy Manners. Hey, Guy. Welcome to the call. Enjoying this. Great. Recovering from my vaccine. Congratulations on getting your vaccine. I saw your pictures, and greetings from Bali. Oh, you just making me jealous. Well, anyways, thank God for Facebook and the internet, and good to see you here. So again, what I was saying, we either indulge or we resist. Something's coming. The same potato chips are coming up. Oh, there's potato chips over there. Now I'm resisting. Should I do it? So I get into this kind of struggle, which is kind of like a war with myself. That's important. Sometimes we need to kind of put boundaries and, no potato chips for a week. I need to lose some weight. And that's going to be a bit of a struggle. I'll get over it. I'm talking about something very, very minor. But it could also be something great, something major. And this internal struggle temporarily might be okay, but as a long-term habitual pattern, it's actually not healthy. So it's indulging is one thing that the sense of self does, the personality does, the ego does. Resisting is another thing that the personality, the sense of self, that the quote-unquote ego does. And the third thing is that it denies. It just goes into denial that what's arising is not happening, like an ostrich burying their head in the sand. None of those are mindfulness practice. None of those are meditation practice. Now, that doesn't mean that people who are practicing mindfulness might do those things. And it doesn't mean that people who are practicing meditation might or might not indulge or resist or deny. We all do that. But when we can find that perfect balance between not indulging, not resisting, and not denying, but being and being with experience. Being with the delicious juice that rises in front of my eyes. Being with somebody knocking on the door that kind of makes Miles nervous. Being with the thought, what are my children doing now, and I got to take them to the pool later, and how am I going to do that? All of these things, kind of my mind is operating. It's either indulging or resisting or struggling some way, or in denial. Fudoshin is simply observing. It's finding that perfect balance between activity and passivity. Neither being too active, neither being too passive, but perfectly balanced in the middle. So how is that immovable? Well, that state itself, the state of Fudoshin, if you look at, what is immovable, well, you have to first look at what is movable. Anything in my body is movable. I shouldn't say anything. I should say everything about my physical sense of self is movable. Why? Because I was born. I'm getting old. I get sick sometimes, and eventually, someday, hopefully far in the future, I will die. It's all moving. It's all moving, and it's all shaking. It is not unshakable, and it's not unmovable. As much as I would like it to be, it is not unmovable. As much as the untrained mind believes that this is a permanent body, it's actually not. So this sense of Miles in the body is profoundly immovable. What about my perceptions, the six sense doors? The same thing. Anything that arises in the sight, a smell, a taste, a sound, a sensation, all of the six sense doors, all of these things are movable. I might hear something that's pleasant, oh, how wonderful, and my mind goes to it with indulgence. I might hear something that's unpleasant, my mind resists it or pulls away from it. All that's movable. So I'm made up of a body, I'm made up of the five senses, obviously, and then I'm also made up of the mind and feelings. Feelings meaning something could be pleasant or unpleasant, it could be neutral, but those things are changing all the time. mean, I'm having a pleasant time with everybody here on Facebook Live, but it's a little bit warm in this room. In the middle of the summer, it's a little bit warm. That's not so pleasant. Somebody just made a noise outside. They dropped something. That's not pleasant. So, it's, my feeling is like the pleasant unpleasantness is coming and going all the time. It's totally movable. And what about my mind? Well, obviously my mind is movable because my thoughts are coming, and some of the thoughts are great, creative, wonderful thoughts. Excuse me. Other thoughts are worry, and these types of things are totally, profoundly movable. So every part of my experience, the experience of being Miles, the body, the feelings, the sensations, the sense doors, the mind, even my consciousness, it's all in flux and flow. And it points to the first basic universal characteristic of all phenomena in the universe is that it's impermanent, that it's changing all the time. If everything's changing all the time, how can we be movable? Well, we need to differentiate. We need to negate everything that's movable. So there's a process of negation in our meditation. When I take away something that's movable, and when I say take away, obviously I don't take away my body. I simply differentiate, and I can witness or observe. I can be and be with my body. When I'm able to be and be with my body, there's a negation of the identity. So that body that I'm observing, that I'm with, is totally movable. The observing mind is not movable. The observing mind is in constant flux and flow, but there's nothing contracted there. Until my mind goes, oh, this is a very cool state. The moment I get the notion, the idea that, oh, this is a cool state, look what I'm doing, then the mind contracts and it becomes another thing that is movable. So when I can remove everything that isn't immovable, I'm left with the immovable. And when I can remove everything that is movable, I'm left with the unmovable or the immovable mind. So it's a process of negation. In Zen Buddhism, they say that all of Zen practice is to negate the self. Again, the self is not a problem. The self can be problematic, but the self is not a problem. But the practice of liberation beyond the self is a practice of negation. So we negate the self, and then what's left? There's only one thing left to do, is to negate the negation. We negate the self, and then we negate the negation. We negate the self, and we negate the negation. And what's left? What's left at that point? Well, I encourage you all to practice meditation to discover what's left at that point. But whatever's left at that point, if we negate the self and we negate the negation, if we negate everything, Fudo, remember, is a negation. Fudo, if we negate everything that's moving, then whatever is left has to be immovable. If we can negate everything that's moving, whatever is left has to be immovable. So I'm going to say two more things before we finish off. One is, how do we do that? And second, how does it relate to Aikido? Because I know there's some Aikido people here. The way that we do that is simply through the practice of mindfulness, that we practice training our attention to observe things in the right way, with the right relationship, at the right distance, at the right intensity, neither too active nor too passive. We observe things as they're arising, and we know them for their characteristics. And as we continue to observe, we know what happens to them. Why do we know what happens to them? Why is it important to know what happens to them? Because they're moving. Everything is changing. So take the breath, for example. When I observe the breath, I observe, okay, it's a big breath, it's a little breath, it's a long breath, it's a short breath, it's a hard breath, it's a soft breath, it's relaxed, it's contract, whatever. I notice things about it. So first I notice it's a breath, but then I get to know, as I continue to observe it in this moment, and this moment, and this moment, I begin to see that there are qualities that are changing about the breath on a regular basis. And as I can track, or in the moment be with those changes, I'll begin to understand that I'll begin to get more and more grounded in the sense of pure witnessing. And in the pure witnessing, as long as it's pure witnessing, it's the immovable part of the immovable mind. The moment I get the notion that says, oh, look at me, I'm witnessing, then that becomes a new thing that I can observe, a contracted identity that I detach from and I observe. And this is a skill that we can all develop. This is a skill that we should all develop. Doesn't mean you should always walk around detaching. Sometimes you actually want to go into an emotion. Sometimes you want to go into a thought. Sometimes you'll want to go into a physical feeling. You want to go, what's going on my shoulder? You want to go into that with mindfulness. But the ability to actually differentiate with mindfulness, where the part of the knowing mind can observe the qualities of what's arising in the present moment, is a super important a practice to develop. Now, how does that relate to meditation? This ability to observe, how does it relate to Aikido? The ability to observe without indulging, without resisting, and without denying is exactly what's needed for the principle of Aikido to arise. What is the principle of Aikido? Well, it actually happens to be the same as the principle of meditation. The principle of Aikido holds conflict with pure awareness, with mindfulness, with Fudoshin, and there's a space of awareness that when the conflict arises and all the bells and whistles and red flags and alarms are going off in my mind, in my body, and in my nervous system, to fight it, to run away from it, or to somehow try to control it, or fight, flight, and freeze, when all of those things are arising, unless I have a certain amount of awareness, they will take over, because we are biologically hardwired for these things to take over. But if I can have enough awareness, and it only takes a little bit, if I can have enough awareness, those things will come up. There'll be an intense experience. It'll come up. It'll stay for a while. Then it'll pass away. And I can stay connected with the source of the conflict, like we do in Aikido. And I can freely respond to the quote-unquote attack, or the quote-unquote the energy of the attack in the present moment, in a way that is appropriate, and in a way that is life-affirming, and in a way that is positive sum. And what I mean by positive sum is it doesn't lead to one person winning and one person losing, or one person losing and one person winning. It means a movement towards a healing of the conflict. That there's movement towards a greater integration. There's a movement toward a greater sense of wholeness. That can only be achieved through through developing a sense of Fudoshin. So when we're practicing Aikido, also when we're practicing meditation, there's lots of techniques, there's lots of abilities that we need to, and skills that we need to develop. There's as many skills in meditation as there are, as many skills and as many techniques in meditation as there are in Aikido. And there's a lot in Aikido. But through the course of our practice, we learn how to apply those skills. We learn how to develop those skills in order to create the conditions where experience just moves on in a natural way, where the sense of miles does not interfere with experience, but rather I shift into a deeper state of pure awareness. It could be a deeper state of pure witnessing, or it could be even a state where the witness dissolves and there's just this kind of non-dual sense of Fudoshin, the immovable mind. From that place, experience tends to just happen. And from that place, that's where, like in Aikido, conflict begins to spontaneously resolve itself. But to do that in Aikido, you have to also have a certain amount of muscle memory, natural muscle memory with the techniques that is post-cognitive. I'm not thinking about which techniques I do. I'm not thinking about what's the best strategy to do. All of the technical expression and all of the strategic positioning and all of the relational aspects of the art begin to happen spontaneously in a state of Fudoshin.